everyone, and welcome to our webinar on how brands and printers benefit from G7. My name is Allison Lacacha, and I'm the marketing manager at TeshCon USA. We're honored to have Sonia Dearden, the print production manager at Lindt Chocolate, here with us today to present. We hope that everyone is safe and healthy during these challenging and uncertain times, and we're so happy to be able to continue to provide really great educational content through all of this. And we're thrilled that Sonia's here with us today, virtually, of course. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to type in all your questions into the questions pane of GoToWebinar, and we'll be addressing them all at the end of the presentation. And I will turn it over to Sonia now.
Thank you, Allison. Again,
and so just so you know, we can see notes. You're not in full presentation mode quite.
So let's see. Let's see, pop that off. Allison, are you seeing your screen now?
Now I see my screen, yes.
Well, that looks like the Mac issue that we thought might happen.
Yes, yep. We were chatting about this before we went live, and
Macs are a little tricky.
A little tricky.
So I think we might still just move forward with this little technical difficulty. And I thought my only technical difficulty today might be if the FedEx guy came and my dog went ballistic running to the front door to greet him. But it appears we have one other small challenge. So if you'll bear with us, I think that I'll continue to move forward through the presentation, knowing that we have this little issue happening. So I'm just going to start off by saying that Alice and I started talking about doing a presentation similar to this because I had to sit down with her one day and we chatted about all the benefits that I have had working with G7 and along with the challenges as well. And there have been plenty of both. And I just wanted to share with you my experiences and definitely, like I said, you know, if you have any questions at the end, I'm happy to chat with you about any questions that you might have. So this is a, yep.
So I wonder if you click use slideshow on the top left corner, if that will solve the problem. Oh, there we go. That's perfect. Right. Fantastic.
But then the notes go away.
Ah.
That's what happens. So we might have to flip back and forth a little bit. But this right here is a pretty staggering statistic. So if you're knowing that your consumers are out in the shopping market, and these is the statistics we're looking at, it shows just how important it is for color on shelf from a consumer standpoint. And Allison, I'm going to flip back. It shows that color is really important to brands. And if color is that important, then I think it's definitely worth researching what things are out there that are going to help you maintain this consistency for your brand. As an international company, it's very important that your brand is not left to multiple people and personal preferences. Think about how many people are involved in the life cycle of print materials: designers, brand managers, pre-press agencies, press operators, and that leaves a lot of room for error. You have so many people, especially maybe not all of your global companies, but even if you're local companies, there are so many things that can go wrong because there are so many hands that touch your product out there. But using G7 and implementing this system was the best way that Lindt could find to help us start to communicate with our vendors. And I'm sure some of you see this challenge as well. You have multiple substrates, printing processes, suppliers and locations, and trying to achieve color consistency can be difficult. In addition to this, you might have somebody on your brand and then they move on. They get a promotion, they transfer, your press operators transfer, people change hands. And not only are you dealing with multiple different people, but you're dealing with multiple different substrates. You're printing gravure, you're printing litho, you're printing flexo and digital, you're printing on plastic, I'm printing on corrugate, I'm printing them on multiple shades of cardstocks and SBS and different boards. So what do we do about that? Well, with G7, it can be much easier. Prior to G7, I would get a package from another country and send that package to my printer as a target for a bag. I would have it sent back to me, and then I would send it to my folding carton vendor and have them use that as the target for a folding carton that I might be producing. So not only has this packaging item come to me from another country through the mail, I have now sent it 2 or 3 times to different print vendors through the mail. And not saying that every printer isn't nice and pristine on the plant floor, but I've seen, you know, throw it in a drawer, your hands are greasy with ink and you're touching it. So using a piece of already existing packaging as your target is probably not the best way for a brand to manage their color. So enter this whole implementation of the G7 process. If we can clearly communicate our expectations at the beginning of the workflow, the better chance the identity of the brand can be maintained, regardless of who around the globe is printing the material, who the designer is, who is pre-flighting it, press checking it, or printing it. And then for the printers, imagine the countless hours that you can save by printing to an approved color proof instead of various brand marketers attending press checks and deciding what color they would like to achieve while your press is running. Many times I have been on press while there are other brands on press with me, and I have my proof and I know exactly what things are supposed to look like, and I can hear in the booth next to me, you know, they're 4 hours into a press check, they're still trying to change one little skin tone or a hair color or a chocolate color or something while they're on press, and the proof is there for nothing other than they use that to proof copy. And that's not a great place to be. So to have a color proof sitting press side with you and you know that is your color target, it saves you countless time and energy from a press side, from a printer side, while the customer is standing there, because I'm not there for hours anymore. I used to be on press and I could do 8 or 10 pulls on a press check. Now I go on a press check and I can probably be done with a press check in 2 or 3 pulls if I even have to go on a press check at all. The implementation of G7 has also made it so that I don't always need to be on a press check, which saves me time and saves the company money as well. But the biggest thing is setting up those expectations through documentation. So we set up global print standards for us so that we can communicate to the vendors, you know, what our intended outcome is at the onset of the design process. And we send this documentation to the print vendors prior to working with them. And we have definitely worked with print vendors to help get them up and running and understand what our expectations are, so that we can help guide them and help them be successful while they're working through this process with us. One of the key points is, you know, settling on tolerances for 4 color images. And for us, as I had mentioned before, it's super important for you to take into consideration the substrate, as well as the printing process itself. The other thing for us especially is that communicating the PMS color tolerances are also communicated. And not only do we use delta values, but we have also recently implemented the use of hue angles in our color, because some of the bright colors that we use on our packaging, we realized are really susceptible to swinging either more to the yellow or more to the blue, and it makes a big difference for our packaging on shelf. So we have kind of tightened up our tolerances to pull ourselves even closer to what our target should be. While we are using proofs, and I do use proofs for color, drawdowns are also sent to us that have to be on the same substrate that we'll be using with the same coating that we'll be using in the final production. The last key component for us is that we also have a reporting or a scoring system in place, and that helps track the vendor's performance and measure print consistencies, job over job and year over year. This not only allows me to communicate performance with the vendors, but it also helps me communicate performance with our brand team, with our quality team. And instead of just saying, I think, or, my perception of this color is, implementing this kind of system helps us to actually have data to back this up, so that when a brand person might not think that a color is where it should be, not only do I have a defense for us, but I have a defense for the printer as well, because I can say, well, no, I see that there is some color variation, but from a consumer standpoint, they're probably not going to see it, and know that based on this reporting system, the printer is actually still in spec. So it actually works both ways. The next big thing for us in this whole process is the education. So we actually have a whole packet that we send to our vendors. And instead of Lint setting up files in different ways for various printers, we supply the profiles to the printers so that they can use them for the print runs. And this will allow us to maintain some control over the final outcome when all the vendors are running to the same profile. And I know that some people do, have prepress agencies that can manipulate the files based on where they're sending it. We are doing just the opposite. We're asking the vendors to run to our process so that we're always sending the same files and we don't have to manipulate the files, because that can definitely muddy the waters for you. The other piece that's very helpful, and probably the most key point of all of this, is using the color bars. Not only do we have them on the press sheets, but Lint also puts them on the actual packaging. And the other thing is, this whole process only works when you have full buy-in from all your vendors, from your print vendors, from your design agencies, and from your pre-press house. So everyone has to have a full understanding of how this whole process works. And as you can see here, we do have a handheld device inside, at Lint, and most of our vendors have also gone ahead and purchased handheld devices, even if they do have them on their machines. And that's super helpful as well, because you really can have a conversation with people when you're on press or when you're getting packaging in the office. Being able to use a device to communicate, what you're seeing is really helpful. And the proofing process, also another key point. As I had mentioned earlier, a lot of people tend to not use proofs as their color target. They can be used as a color target. With some of our colors, we have definitely had to have tweaks made to certain color profiles and to make sure that the proofer is hitting the colors the way they should be. But I will say I stand firm in most colors, you can proof them. If you're into metallic inks, no, you can't proof those. Fluorescent inks, that becomes a little bit more challenging to proof as well. But when it comes to most brand colors, you can get your proofer, and we're lucky enough to have a RIP and a proofer in-house that we can print to. And we supply proofs to our vendors, but even if you're working with an outside agency that is providing the proofs for you, you can still work with them on adjusting those colors so that you're hitting all your colors the way you should be for your brand. And lastly, as I had also mentioned, is the drawdowns are really important, and we have some pretty tight guidelines when it comes to our drawdowns. While I do use the proof, and I do believe that it can hit the color 90% of the time, I always do have drawdowns made for any new colors that we'll be printing, and I make sure that the drawdowns are probably about within 1 to 1.5 delta E before these jobs go on print, because that just gives me that last knowledge base in my mind when these jobs are going to print, that the printer will actually be able to hit this color when they're on press. So still a really important part to this whole piece are the drawdowns. In addition, that was probably more the printer piece, but also going through this process, not only is it the education of print vendors and understanding your specifications, but it's also about educating your team. And this includes my graphic designers, my pre-press agencies, as well as my brand people that are in the office with me on a day-to-day basis. We do supply our ICC profiles to our designers. We understand, we help them understand the importance of embedding these ICC profiles, and it's just as important about how the files are built. We've taken a good hard look in the past couple of years about how our files are built and making sure that the files are built consistently, because if the files that you're supplying to the vendor don't match how another file was built, there's no way that the vendor is going to hit your targets. So we have also taken some ownership in starting to understand how we're building these files before they're even going to the vendor, and making sure that everyone that touches our files is aware of how the files should be built and they're paying close attention to them. Same with the color bars. The color bars that are on the side of the press sheet are not the only important piece. As I mentioned, we also place color bars on the packaging. And again, that is another very important piece that I probably stress that above anything when the files are being set up, is making sure that anybody that touches the files understands how these color bars are supposed to be set up and the values that are supposed to be input on these color bars. Because if your color bars are no good on your packaging, then this whole process that we have set up is going to fail if the color bars are not maintaining the correct values in them. Back to that proofing piece, as I said, we do have an internal proofer in the office, and we have a GMG RIP. It makes it easy for us not only to design in-house, because colors can be reviewed really quickly, but we also use these proofs, as I mentioned, to send them to the vendors. So very often we save a little time and money just in that sense, because we're able to send proofs to the vendors that are already color correct, and they know that they can match to these proofs. And we also know what to expect before it even leaves the office. So I can take it to marketing, I can take it to the brand team, and they know exactly what to expect. I remember 5 years prior to this, before I did G7, the brand team would sit down, they would look at the proof, and they'd be like, great, well, I don't really like the way this color green looks, but you can fix that on press. Well, that's pretty nerve-wracking for somebody to go on press and say, okay, I'm supposed to fix this on press, but what exactly does that mean? Because I could be tired, my flight could have been delayed. There are so many things that impact how somebody sees color, and I'm going in there with the brand manager saying, well, you can fix that for me. Well, what if they don't like how I fixed it? So this was one of the key points, not only having this tool to design the process in the first place, but to also walk out the door going, I know exactly what my target's supposed to be, and I don't have to play any games. Lastly, for us, the other very important piece for us was training the teams also in-house on how to use some sort of measuring device, so that we're taking the guesswork out of these packages coming in, and we're not standing in front of a window and then running into a dark office to see what the packaging looks like against the target. We now have the proofs in there. We can use the device to scan any of the packaging that comes in, because we have color bars placed on the packaging. It helps when our quality team has questions. The quality team also has them out in the warehouse, and they're able to scan the packaging to see if anything that's in question is in spec or not. That's helpful at 2 o'clock in the morning when they're trying to fill bags out on the line, and I'm not getting texts in the middle of the night that say, I think we have to pull XYZ packaging off the line because we don't think it matches what it's supposed to for print specs. Kind of take that guesswork out of it, because now they have the ability to be able to know for sure if they are or not within spec, without having to wait for me to come into the office in the morning to approve something. And the use of the reporting function that I had mentioned earlier that's very key as well, because I can receive the reports directly from the print vendors, I already have some sort of, knowledge of what I am about to get when it's coming into the building. So if I'm receiving these reports directly from the vendor, I will already know before it's even shipped to me if I am anticipating any issues that I might have to correct. And this also helps me communicate with purchasing so that we can start using some sort of scoring system to know which vendors are consistently in target, always running within target, and which vendors we seem to be struggling with, and we might need to have conversations with them on how we up their capabilities of printing to length specifications. And the other nice thing about having this device is, quality and creative aside, it goes back to that piece again for marketing. Any questions that they have, if I come in with a scanning device or this reporting that I have, I can say, yes, I agree. There could be some sort of, there could be some small change in the color, but probably not so much that the consumer is going to see that on shelf. And the reporting and the scanning devices help communicate with marketing, whether or not things are falling within acceptable tolerances. So these are your key takeaways, and I think your key benefits, and it kind of, shows for brand, your cost savings and your checkpoints of implementing some sort of color management system that says, you can all align to, on jobs prior to print runs. You can more easily move things from vendor to vendor, and you have a better understanding, what differences you might see, printing on different substrates. I think that was one key item, is the knowledge that you gain to be able to have the conversations with your vendors. They know what my expectations are, and they can so easily call me and say, there's no way, this XYZ job for holiday is going to print like your everyday items because you decided to change the paperboard on this one, and we can have that discussion on how things might react once it's on press, and what things that we might do in order to be able to get that item to print appropriately. So this process has also helped me build a better relationship with our vendors, and I trust them even more to know, even if I'm not on site or if it is in the middle of the night, that they know what my specifications are. So that has really helped in that they've become more of a partner through this process. Again, I like to travel, but there's only so much travel I like to do. And this definitely has reduced the need for me to be on site for press checks and do all that traveling. And again, because I trust the vendors, they know what my specifications are. I know they, have that proof press side. We've already communicated about it. I usually have no problem not being on press checks. Typically, the only time that I'm on a press check now is if we're printing some crazy new item that has to be on foil, or we're using a color that I am creating. I always try to stick to the Pantone colors, but once in a while we do have some specials that we create ourselves. In those instances, I'll go on a press check, just to not put the whole ownership of matching that color onto the press vendor. Again, clear expectations for the vendor regarding acceptable work. That goes to the scanning, and that goes to the reporting. And then for us, the bigger thing is overall increase in consistency. That was one of the other main reasons that we had implemented G7, because I would print a carton, and a year and a half later, we're still doing reprints of this carton. However, the visual quality of the carton had decreased significantly. With having G7 in place and the reporting and the scanning, that happens less. We definitely get better consistency with this process in place year over year. So we get higher consistency in reprints. And then, for the printers, again, that's reduced press time. The proofing process is more efficient versus making changes on press. And I think, love us or hate us, printers for brands, but I think us standing inside a light booth with you for 10 hours in a 24-hour period gets taxing on both the printers and and the brand team. So, having this process in place has definitely eliminated the amount of time that we have to spend on press. And then that quantitative reports for purchasing and print buyers to assess print vendor performance. That's also a big one. Is prior to this, we had no way of measuring or communicating to purchasing how we felt printers were doing. It was just more hearsay. We were saying, oh, we love this printer and they're always doing amazing. And, oh, we're not doing so well with this printer and we're always having issues. With the reporting piece in place, now I have actual reports that we can document, and we have conversations on a quarterly basis to kind of assess how each vendor is really doing. And I have documentation to back that up. So that's about it for me. If you have any questions, happy to answer any. That's a lot of information all at once.
Thank you so much, Sonia, for the great presentation. We have a ton of questions coming in. So we'll get right to them. Let's see. The first question is, how can the pressmen hit the tolerances?
Usually if they're having a harder time, if they're having a hard time reaching the tolerances, usually, from my perspective, I'm on the brand side. I have the documentation. I did have somebody help me. I have a consultant that helped me pull the documentation together. If we find that they're struggling with meeting tolerances on press, usually what we find you might just need to re-fingerprint a press. There have been situations where I've seen we've just had to curve some plates and make some adjustments. But at least now with this documentation and with these tolerances written, you have somewhere to go, and you have some more knowledge, some recipe of starting to reach those tolerances with the documentation that we have in place.
And the next question is, how does the pressman deal with color variation?
I guess I'd have to ask how to be a little bit more specific. Color variations with PMS colors or with the process images. Because when you're having color variations, my first thought about color variations is I've even seen a full sheet with, maybe 6 or 10 items up on one sheet have color variations across the press, even from end to end. I've been on press runs where they say, oh, only look at this corner right here because that's the only piece that printed right. And so when we're on press, when I go on press, that's one of the things I'm looking for is for evenness across the sheet. So if we're talking about color variation that way, if there's not evenness across the sheet, then that might be my first indication to have a conversation with the printer to ask if there might be maybe some maintenance that needs to be done to the press, or some education on how we balance that sheet out a little bit better. There's so many variables when it comes to answering that question, because it depends on a lot of different factors.
Makes sense. Let's see. The next question is, how do you deal with the variety of optical brightener levels in different substrates?
Good question. And I don't often end up having to deal too much with the optical brightener. So I would actually have to look into asking somebody with a little bit more experience on that end. So I am unfortunately not able to answer that question about the optical brighteners, because it isn't something that I come up against very often.
And that's something that we can always get back to. I think that question came from Gordon, and we can get back to Gordon with an answer for that question. The next question is, where on the sheet would you place the color bar?
If we're talking sheet as far as a full press sheet, usually I've had different vendors suggest putting them in certain places. Typically, you know, they're running them along the side or up along the top. It also depends on how their press is running. So from a sheet perspective, I usually let the print vendor decide where they think they might best place the bars in order to manage that print run, because they know their press better than I know the press. When it comes, and like I said, I have seen them, you know, sometimes I ask for, if I'm not on press, I ask for a full press sheet to be sent to me, and I've seen some interesting placement of bars. The one thing that I have learned through this process, and I definitely have updated and manipulated and learned a lot myself going through this process over the past 5 years, is the one thing that I've learned is when there are large areas of PMS colors and only small areas of 4-color images, we try to take the sheet and put the gray balance blocks a little bit closer to where the 4-color images are actually printing, and don't place them on, you know, along the whole sheet. If there's a large, like I can think of, you know, the cases that you put packaging in for, or put packaging in for, like Costco, like large club cases and such. There's such a large amount of Pantone colors and floods of PMS colors on those, and such a small area of 4-color imagery. So we just make sure that we place the bars where they're going to be most beneficial for the packaging.
And let's see, does that work for all print processes, gravure, litho, and flexo?
Yes. Again, each vendor, we've had to, depending upon the print process, they've had to make some minor modifications, you know, and we realize even older presses and newer presses, there's a big difference there, but we have had pretty good luck, and we do all 3 print processes quite frequently, and we've had pretty good luck with all of them.
And does G7 work with printers who are EG?
I'm sorry, can you explain that one more, Allison?
I think he means expanded gamut.
So that's, I was thinking, I was like, oh, if we're talking, I don't print on expanded gamut, and I'm sure there are people that are probably listening in on this call that could answer that question. I know it is being worked on, and there's been a lot of research done over the past couple of years. It's still new, I think, to everyone moving into this expanded gamut piece. Like I said, we don't use it. I know the people that I work with from a consultant standpoint, and some of the experts that I speak to, you know, when I'm asking questions, when I'm struggling myself, have worked on this, and I know that they've made great strides in having this work. I have even done one item where I had to kind of tweak some color bars a little bit in order to be able to manage a situation where we had to remove some colors. So it's a little bit similar to that expanded gamut question. So there are ways to do it. I have not done it. And somebody else would have to speak with a little bit more knowledge about the process than I do, but I know that they're working on it. And I know that they've had success with it. I just don't myself work with it.
Let's see. Do you believe that the better the pre-press, the easier it is to control the print?
Yes. As I mentioned, I've done a lot of research even into how our own files are built, and have learned very quickly the importance of how consistent file setup is really helpful in the final outcome of any print job. So taking the side of the printers, I know a lot of printers get blamed for inconsistent results or not good enough results, and I will say a lot of the times, yes, it comes to how your files are set up before they're even handed over to the printer. So I do think it makes a huge difference how the files are set up, and that's why we try I try really hard to make sure that the designers and the pre-press agencies are educated on this, and that they're paying close attention to all file setups, so that the printer has less struggles when it comes to that.
And besides delta E, do you find spot color tone value useful when controlling spot color printing?
Yes. That was also another piece over the past couple years that we've looked at, and you know, our specs used to say delta E only, and I did have to start looking at hue angles and different ways of managing the color. I think it probably, you know, it depends on how tight your brand is about their colors. And then the other thing is, you know, any of you that are familiar with our products, our range of products are these bright, vibrant colors on the shelf. Sometimes that's to the detriment of me when it comes to trying to match it, because it's without that hue angle piece. So as I said, I added the hue angle piece in there. I definitely got a lot of pushback on it. I find that printers have a harder time managing that. They actually cannot manage that once I'm on press. That's why it's really important for the drawdowns. The drawdowns are so important for me, because I know that that's where I need to work on that piece of it. If I'm having an issue with the drawdown, then I'm definitely going to have an issue on press, because they're not going to be able to manage those tonal values and those hue angles while I'm on press. So that definitely has to come from the ink room. And that is something that I just put in the brand guidelines for us over the past probably 1.5 to 2 years to try to tighten that up for me. Some brands are a little bit more loose with that, and it maybe won't matter as much, but for us with the bright colors, it definitely makes a big, huge difference, because I can have a red that looks really blue, and I can have a red that looks really orange. So I can be 1.5 delta E, and I can still have the two reds look quite different because of that.
And okay, more questions pouring in. Delta E TVI tolerances will be different from a color versus within a run. Do you have a sampling process?
I do not on that. And I agree with that. And that's one of those, you know, evolving processes for us.
Let's see. Do you recommend brand printers use ink department and press room software?
Sorry, you cut out in the very first part of that, Allison. What was the beginning of the question?
Oh, sorry. The question is, do you recommend that brand printers utilize ink department and press room software?
I'm trying to figure out in my head what the question means. For the brand themselves, or do you mean at the printer? Yes, when we are working with a printer, we would prefer that they had on-site ink mixing, if that's what the question means. I'm not sure if that's what the question is asking.
Well, and if Brian, if you're still on and you want to chat in about exactly what you mean, we can address that again. Another question, have you seen metameric differences on your brand packaging colors from the press room viewing stations to the retail lighting, and how different?
Yes, we definitely have. Let's see, I think I remember who I learned metamerism from. I definitely have, but there was a second part again, Allison, you cut out, is from the Lightroom to the store shelf, but there was a piece of that. How have I handled it? Is that what you said?
How do you deal with the differences?
I definitely have seen the differences happen. I haven't had such an issue that we have had to go back to the drawing board and try to rework any colors because of it. So I haven't had to really deal with it. It's kind of one of those things that we say, yes, there are going to be variations, right? depending upon each store, and each store has a different lighting situation. So that is a piece that we haven't tackled yet as far as that goes. So yes, I agree, it happens. There has been some education on, yes, you are going to be in certain stores, and my soft blue packaging definitely looks a lot different than it does from one store to the next, depending upon what they're using for lighting and what have you. But we haven't tried to do anything about that. We can't control the wholesale stores. Can't even control our retail stores.
Let's see. From the brand owner's perspective, where in the printing workflow can use the most improvement, such as pre-press, plate room, press room, etc.?
I would say it goes back to earlier, file setup. File setup is a huge part of it, and understanding what designers are setting up in their files. I just came across something where there was a huge flood, a large flood of color on a large case that was set up as 4-color, and I thought, oh, don't do that, because that will be, the color will be swinging all over the place. The printer has no hope of maintaining that large amount of color, using 4-color process for that. So I do think that it comes from an educating the designers or the pre-press agencies to think about how the files are going to be printed in the end. So, and I think that takes some understanding of color management and knowing, how these colors and how they mix with each other, how they're going to affect the press once they're on press. So sometimes I rely a little bit. I communicate quite a lot with the printers when I have designers setting up files, and I kind of try to oversee them a little bit to say, oh, don't, yes, you can do that, or maybe don't do that, because that's probably not going to work once we go on press. So I think there is some education that needs to happen from the design side. I think the pre-press agencies should have enough knowledge to be able to make some recommendations if you have the luxury of having a pre-press agency. Sometimes you're going right from the designers right into the print, right over to the printer. So if you're going straight to the print vendor, I try to leave a little bit of time so I can have some conversations, so that when their team is looking over the files, that I'm able to make some adjustments. But if there's anything that I would say when designers are going through, their 4 years or their 2 years of schooling prior to going out into the workforce, is I would love to see schools educate them a little bit more on that piece of it. It's easy to create a wonderful piece of art on a screen, but it's a whole other ballgame trying to get it to print out sometimes. I've seen some interesting things.
Okay, another question. My belief is that a delta E value that is discernibly different are different based on the specific color. Do you have a single delta E value tolerance, or is the tolerance different for each color? Two parts to that.
Our range of colors is pretty vast, and many things. Substrate, I have to take substrate into consideration. If I am printing on a plastic substrate and adhering to metallic, we're probably going to loosen up the tolerance to 3 or 4. If you're printing on paper or a good, a nice bright white sheet, our tolerances are probably 1.5 to 2, but this goes depending upon the brand or the item that you're printing for us. We're tighter on our 5 main flavors than we are possibly on some of the outlying flavors. And so it's so many things. I try to take into account substrate. I try to take into account you know, what color it is. I have learned enough in my experience with this to know what colors are easily matched. There's a particular light blue that we use that I want that bag to go away because it's very challenging and it changes all over the place. And I have 4 different vendors that print it and they all come up slightly differently. But to the point of the question, they could all be within 2 or 3 delta E, but you can just see that color move all over the place. It's just really challenging. So it's substrate, it's knowing the Pantone color that you're working with. And so there are times that we are aware that there'll be times that we have to loosen up the tolerances a bit. So there are some that we're tighter with, and there are some that we're looser with, depending upon the substrate, the color, and where and how it's being printed.
And let's see, a few more questions coming in. Referring to the report that Lint receives from the print supplier, is this a report that is based on an averaging of scans throughout the print run, or is it a report per sheet printed and scanned with a spectro?
It's an average. When the printer can, it's an average of, and we work with the printers on when they can scan. It's different for every printer when they have the capability to do it. We have some presses, you know, some printers that have brand new presses and they have, you know, they can scan them in line and do it that way, and they, you know, do it every so often. Gravure, that's a little bit differently. Usually we're waiting till the end of a reel to have the scans done. So it varies. I mean, we work with the print vendors to find out what works best for them when they're doing these scannings. And we do have some that do hand scan. They definitely do hand scan them on the side. Some of them, you know, the press people might be watching it, but they also have a quality team that is also hand scanning them, you know, away from the press, and they're scanning stuff into the reporting software for us. So it varies, and we work with the vendors on that to see what their capabilities are.
And let's see, I think we have 2 more questions. Do you find it difficult to get pressmen to use the QC software for your reporting purposes?
For us, it's mandatory for them to have the software. So when in the beginning of, you know, when we first start working with potential vendors, I have a list of 10 questions that purchasing hands to each vendor when we're going to work with them or when we're thinking about working with them, so that I have an idea already of what equipment they have in place and what their knowledge of G7 is. So yes, we do want the press people scanning all the time. Do we have instances where we struggle with that? Yes, but that goes into a little piece of the presentation that I just spoke about, that a lot of this is about partnership and education. I work with a lot of great press operators, and I've definitely had some struggles with some press operators that don't believe that this process works because they may have been doing this for a really long time and they know their press and they know how to, you know, reach certain things without having a handheld scanner or any device telling them, you know, how they should be running the press. So it's gone both ways. But like I said, I will say, out of all the vendors that we've used, and I've used a lot over the past several years, I can honestly say I've never had a print vendor say to me that they don't, in the end, appreciate the process and like the process. I even had one printer say that, and I definitely had a lot of pushback when I first started working with them, and it wasn't going well at first. But in the end, they said it was amazing for them to learn all of this, and that they in turn spoke to their brands that they printed for, a very large brand that they print for, and asked the brand to come on board with doing G7 themselves. And the brand thought it was a great idea, and they do it. And they have been doing it for probably 3 years. So at the end of the day, each one has said having to learn this process and go through this process has made them a much better printer. And a lot of them, it might be a little painful in the beginning, but it definitely is beneficial on the other end of it.
Absolutely. Let's see. Do you specify tolerances only for solid colors or also for critical process builds, which closely resemble important image areas, chocolate brown, process build, reflected by a patch in a control bar?
That might have just come from one of my printers. Because we actually did find, and that is a great question, and I am working with Ron Ellis on this right now, is we did find that we are going to have to modify some of our color bars in order to try to manage the color of some of the chocolate. So what we have found over the past couple of years, remember when I said we're always evolving, we're always changing, we're always learning. And this we have learned in probably the past 4 or 5 months, a couple different places have come to me to talk about maybe changing up the color bars. And so we are in the process of working on that and trying to figure out how we best kind of start to manipulate these a little bit better so that the color bars, to their point, better reflects the hues and changes in that chocolate color, you know, going from milky or light colors into the super high cocoa range that we have. So yes, we have found that we are going to need to tweak our process in order to help the print vendors manage that chocolate a bit more, because it's pretty challenging trying to print it. And it does have, you know, we've got a line of chocolate that runs from 70% up to 99%, and some of the chocolates only have a 5% difference in cocoa range. So there is such a subtle difference in each chocolate piece. So definitely are going to need to make some modifications to the color bar in order to help them control that.
Well, I think that about wraps it up. That was a great Q&A session. Thank you so much for answering all those questions, and a great presentation as well. And I just want to thank everyone for attending and for registering for this event. We really appreciate it, and I hope that everyone stays safe and healthy, and we can get back to our normal lives sometime soon.
The new norm.
The new norm. I don't want the new norm.
No, I don't want the new norm.
Well, thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.